Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel for Juls Creations. Today I'm going to be showing you yet another all-new shape of paper bead I created. I wanted another shape of paper bead to make, but this one in a cuboid shape. So my newest creation, LongBox Beads, which are different from the box beads that I created earlier. These are made to be more skinny and vary in length depending how you make them. So I want to show you a few jewelry pieces that I made with the long box beads. And depending where you place the eyelets, you can display them in a variety of ways. You can attach them to each other or to a charm above or below, or group multiple long box beads hung in a tier, or attach them together, or you can attach a string of them together and form a necklace, whatever you want. So in this tutorial, I'll be going over the basics of making long box beads and a tool to make the long box beads with. I'll also be glazing the beads with UV resin. I'll also be showing you a flat long box bead that you can make using a little different technique. And then it's up to you to decide what you want to do with the beads, whether it's for a pendant, necklace, earrings, key rings, or something else. And a great thing about the long box beads is that there's no template needed. Now, I already have tutorials for many of the techniques I'll be using today, such as glazing with UV resin and jewelry assembly like jump rings and chains and so on. So I will not be duplicating explaining these techniques, but if you would like more detail, there are links posted below in the description for 3 other videos that cover more detail on these techniques. And here is a list of the supplies that we'll need to make the long box beads and the long box bead tool. I'm not listing the supplies needed to add UV resin or varnish. Those are all listed in my prior videos that cover those processes. However, I am going to add UV resin to these beads later in the tutorial so you can see that process. So we will need 2 flat wooden sticks, about a 1/4 inch wide, some painter's tape or masking tape, a small piece of tin foil to hold our glue, a paintbrush, and some clear drying glue. Now, once you've made the beads, you'll be able to look at them and decide how you want to use them. If you want to hang them vertically on earrings or horizontally connected to each other, or if you're going to hang something with the charm dropping off of it. Once you decide how you want to use them, you'll generally want 1 or 2 screw eye pins per bead. For cutting, we need a cutting mat and ruler and a razor knife, and then some fine scissors, some standard scissors, a large safety pin, and a pen or pencil. And then optionally, you can use a mini motorized drill or Dremel to drill the holes for the eye pins. Okay, let's get started. So in order to make our long box beads, we need to make our tool using our 2 1/4 inch wooden sticks and some painter's tape or masking tape. We'll put the 2 sticks together and we want to make sure that the ends are aligned. The best way to keep it level is to lay the ends onto the table. And we're going to tape 2 areas, one on the bottom and one just above that. And that will keep the sticks from sliding around. So we'll tear off a piece of tape about 1 inch long and make sure that the sticks are level, and then just start taping around the bottom. And then we're going to lay it flat on the table to keep the sticks from moving while taping them. That's one. Then another piece of tape and wrap that around same way. And that's all we need to make our tool. Now the important thing is that we have a long space up here to work with. This particular tool has 2.5 inches to work with, so we'd be able to make a 2.5 inch long bead. You could lay the tape lower if you wanted a longer work area, but honestly, the super long beads just look weird. So this is a sample I did with plain paper just to see the size. And this bead is 2.5 inches long, which is just super long for jewelry. So I like to keep mine 2 inches or under. And I like to put a little handle on mine just to make it look finished, but it's totally optional. To add a handle, you would just start just below the edge of the top piece of wrapped tape and lay our tape kind of at an angle so that as we wrap it around, it will spiral. And then just wrap it around all the way to the bottom, making sure to pull the tape tight all the way, and then just tear off the end and squish it down. And now we have a nice tool for making our long box beads. Now this bead was just plain white paper to test the size, not much to look at, but we'll be using pretty paper to make our real beads, and then the shorter length will look much more bead-like. Now, one thing I did learn from making this last batch of long beads, at first I used the same technique for adding the UV resin that I used on the box beads, and that was to pour the resin on and then just smooth it out. But I think that actually makes the glazing too thick, so it seems to round off the edges, so it lost some definition. So this time around, we're going to be painting on the resin, keeping our squared shape, which I will cover later. So for the long box bead, we do not need any type of a template. We just need to measure out 3 pieces of paper. And you can use most any type of paper as long as it has some thickness to it. You don't want to use a really thin paper. I'm going to be reusing a calendar page since I like to recycle. And we're going to cut 3 strips. So this is an example just so you can see what type of pieces we'll be cutting. And I highly recommend using a razor knife rather than scissors because these are very thin strips and they need to be really straight. We'll be cutting one long strip that's a 1/4 inch wide and another identical strip that's a 1/4 inch wide. And then our wider strip is going to be 1 5/8 inch wide. So what we'll be doing is we'll use the 2 long skinny strips to go around the bead from top to bottom. But the wide strip will actually wrap around the tool this way at whatever length you decide to make the bead. So you can cut the length however you want, and you'll need 3 pieces of the same length out of the wide strip. So I'm going to start by cutting my 1/4 inch strip, and because I have a hole right here, it really gets in my way, and I'm sure there's creative ways of measuring to where we could work around that, but I'll just cut it and save it for later. So to make our 1/4 inch piece, we just take the ruler and line up a 1/4 inch on the ruler to the edge of the paper and mark it. And then we'll do this again down here a little bit lower. Then we take our ruler and line that up to the marks that we made to make that nice straight line. And make sure that you hold the ruler down really hard so the paper doesn't slip out from under you while you're cutting. And then just slice it off. And there's one. And just a quick note, you can also measure this on the back side of the paper if you prefer. So now we're going to measure one more 1/4 inch. And we'll line up the lines and cut one more 1/4 inch strip. And now we'll be cutting that 1 5/8 inch strip. This is the wider one. So again, we measure, but this time we'll be measuring 1 5/8 inch, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right here. Make a line. And then down here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mark our line. Then line up our ruler to the lines, making that straight line, holding the ruler down really tight, and slice off that piece. All right, so we've got our strips that we'll need, and we have our wide piece and our 2 skinny pieces. But now the wider piece needs to be cut into 3 equal length pieces, whatever length you want, but 3 of them. So I'm going to do a 1 1/4 inch bead, so I'll cut 3 pieces at 1 1/4 inch long. And because this length is very similar to the width, we need a way to remind ourselves which way is longwise. So this is our length. So on the back side, I'm just going to mark a little arrow or a line. And we don't have to measure the next 2 pieces. We're going to use the first one as a template. So we just lay it over the top of the strip to measure. Make sure that our arrow is going longwise on the strip. And then just line it up. Use our scissors. Cut it to the same length. And one more. And cut. And let's also mark the direction the length is heading. And you won't see this side of the paper, so we can write on it and that's just fine. But this line shows us that on the tool, we lay the paper the same direction. So the line and the tool go the same way. So the length goes this way, not this way. And as I mentioned earlier, the length and the width are very similar. So let me show you that they're just slightly off in size, although you can't really see it. But if you line them up facing the same direction, it's perfect. But then turned the other way, you'll see that it's just slightly off in size. So we want them all going the same vertical direction. All right, let's get ready to assemble our beads. And we do need our foil to hold some glue in it. And we can just leave this flat, or we can fold the edges and just make like a little tray. That way the glue can't run off. So all I'm doing is just folding it in half on the edges and then pinching the corners together. And let's pour in some glue. And you can use whatever clear drying glue you want. You don't need to use a whole lot. We can always get more. All right, and we're going to take our long bead tool and we're going to start with one of our wide pieces and make sure that our arrow is pointing vertically on the tool. We're going to start by lining it up on one edge. And if you watched my box bead video, you'll remember this bend and pinch technique. So again, we're going to pinch the edges with our fingers and we want to make the edges really sharp and then bend the paper around and then pinch the edges and bend and pinch. And we're just getting started, so it may slip around, especially if you're using glossy paper like this calendar. So we just roll it back up and pinch. And as soon as we've got it all the way around, you can glue it so it'll stay in place. But try not to get glue onto the wood, onto your tool, because then you may have a hard time getting the bead off the tool once the glue is set. So I'm tightening this up by pushing the bead in with my thumbs while gently tugging on the rest of the strip with my forefingers. And we want the beginning of the bead to be super tight. And I think I'm going to put a piece of paper under me so that I don't get glue on my mat. And as you can see, these papers are not sticking real well because of the glossy paper. Glossy paper takes a bit longer for the glue to set. So I'm just going to hold the glue for a little bit longer than usual and let the glue set. And while we're holding it and waiting for it to set, we can also kind of gently pinch those edges really nice and sharp again because we want those as sharp as possible. And just waiting for this to set. Right. And then we can slide our long box bead off. And this is the length of our bead. And it will get a little bit fatter as we start building up our bead. And now this is just the base, so you probably won't even see this part of it. And I'm going to take our 1/4 inch strip, our skinny strip, and put a little glue just to get it started. And then just lay the strip on the bead and get it lined up to the edge. And you'll see that the paper feels like it's overlapping on the sides just a bit, but that's okay. Just let it overlap. But make sure that not only the sides of the paper line up, but also the bottom edge. And now we're going to bend and pinch it very carefully because the base is still very fragile. And then again, and we want the ends to be really snug. And we'll glue this side as well. And we'll need to wait for it to set. All right, and then we're going to bend and pinch and bend and pinch and glue it down. So once we have it wrapped all the way around to where the end is solid, we can apply glue to the end. And then from here forward, we can just glue the whole strip all the way down and a little extra on the end. And then we're going to do our bend and pinch and make it very, very tight on the end because if it's not, it will come back to haunt you. And bend and pinch. Make sure the sides are lined up. All right, so this strip is done. And then you can see how we've only got wrapping going in one direction. So now we want to wrap this other side that has not been wrapped yet, and we're going to do the same exact thing. So we're going to get it started with a little glue, line it up to the bottom, and you're actually connecting the edges to the other skinny wrap edge rather than the paper inside, because the inside kind of sinks in a little bit. So we gently align the edges, and we add glue to the strip, bend and pinch, bend and pinch, lining up our edges. And you see how there's a little air there? We don't want that. So we're going to make sure that it's really tight. So just push it down and pinch it. Slide any excess down the side if you need to, because we don't want any air in there. And let's glue up the rest of the strip. And we can just continue sharpening our edges. Make sure there's no extra air in there. Bend and pinch. Make sure you press down really good on the ends because otherwise it'll pop up like a little air pocket and we don't want that. And what I'm doing after I bend and pinch the ends, I take my finger and thumb and slide it along the sides just to make sure that both sides are level. And then if you want, you can also cut that little last end off just so it aligns on an edge. And again, you probably won't be seeing a whole lot of this part because we're going to be covering it with this other piece. All right, we're going to take another wide piece and again, turn the paper so the arrow is going vertically on the bead. Okay, so we're going to paint glue on one side and lay the glue side down, aligning the paper to the edge of the bead. And make sure that your paper is centered vertically as much as possible. I have to wait a minute for this to stick. And then bend and pinch. And what I like to do is keep the bead laying on the table to give some resistance as we bend the paper. And we need a little more glue. So let's go ahead and finish gluing this entire piece. And we need to get the glue all the way to the edges. Bend and pinch, bend, pinch, bend, and pinch. Okay, so I'm going to cut this little tip off so that it will line up with the edge of the bead. So we're almost done now. And the last piece that we put on is going to be the prettiest piece. So I saved this for last. This one had some brown things on it, and I just like these colors, so I saved this one for last. And we're going to line up our arrows so that they go the right way. Turn it over and lay the glue side onto our paper strip, lining up the edges and centering it vertically. And then we're going to bend and pinch to get it started. Then glue the entire piece. And this is our last piece, all the way to the edges. Bend, pinch, voila! Our bead is done for the most part. And now this is why I said you might want some very fine scissors so that you can trim off any really fine edges that are sticking out. Just look it over and let's kind of push our top and bottom snugly to make them tight, no air pockets. Now to put a hole in here for our screw-in eyelet, we have two options. If we use a safety pin right now, this is still sort of soft because the glue is not dry, so pushing in a safety pin would make it bend and cave in. So we would need to wait for the glue to dry completely, like about an hour, before we use a safety pin. The other option is if you have a little handy dandy mini drill or a Dremel that can drill, then we can start drilling right away. So for this bead, I'm going to put a little hole in the end. And you don't have to push hard, just let the drill do the work, and that one's done. Otherwise, we can wait till the glue is completely dry and then just use a safety pin by poking and working the hole through. And since my holes are in, I'm going to go ahead and screw in my eyelets. So I'm just going to push the eyelets into the hole while I'm twisting. And remember, right now the paper is still soft and it's just paper, so be gentle. But once we put the resin on, or the varnish, it's going to harden it and protect it. Now adding my second eyelet, and you'll want to make sure that both eyelets are facing the same direction. So the next step will be glazing our bead with resin or varnish. So we want to make sure that these are dry 100% first so that the moisture from the beads don't affect our glaze. So I'm going to set this to the side and let it dry, and I'm going to make one more bead and I'll be right back. So I wanted to show you a little trick. When you're cutting your paper, sometimes the ruler isn't tight enough and the ruler or the paper might slip, and then you end up cutting into your paper strip by mistake. So I'm going to purposely do this. Okay, and if this happens and your paper gets split like this, don't throw it away because there is a fix for it. So you can take your glue and separate your pieces gently and take a little bit of glue and glue the inside of the cut. So I'm getting this piece out of the way, and glue that one, and then glue the other one where it's split, and make sure to get the entire edge. And then don't worry if there's just a little bit too much glue, and then just slide off any excess glue and line the cut back together, and then they're stuck together just barely, but with that little bit of glue, when it dries, it'll be just like one piece. And this can be used on the inside of a long box bead, so you won't even see the cut either. So you don't need to waste the piece, it's perfectly fine, just a little trick. All right, so I've cut the pieces for my second long box bead, and I want to mark the piece that I think will be the prettiest, which to me is this one. And I think this will go really well with the other bead that I made. So I'm going to mark this one just so that I know this is going to be the last piece that I put on. I marked the arrows as I was cutting it so I know which direction is lengthwise, so which direction to lay the piece. So we're going to line up our arrow and it can be this way or it can be this way. It doesn't really matter as long as the arrow is going along the length of the LongBox bead tool. So I'm going to run through this second bead really quickly. Now apparently I did get a little glue on my tool, so this piece is not cooperating to come off. It is really important that you don't get glue on your tool because it may glue your paper to the tool and then you have to tear it to get it off. And normally I'd use a bit of rubbing alcohol and cotton pad to clean off this glue, but I'm just going to keep going. So this is the piece that was damaged that I glued back together earlier. And I want to just trim this little edge a bit. Okay, so let's continue. And I'm going to start with this one so that it can be inside the bead so it won't be seen. And bend and pinch. Now, since the bead is just getting started, the ends are still hollow, so there's nothing for the paper to stick to. So instead of gluing the entire strip, I'm just going to glue the bead for now. And bend and pinch. Make sure the edges are lined up. So you see now I have an edge with paper to hold the glue, so now I can just glue the whole strip all the way down. So there's no exact measurement on how long the 1/4 inch strips need to be. As long as it is at least 10 inches long so that it can wrap around the bead a few times. It can be longer, like the full length of a sheet of paper or even the length of a calendar page. As long as you can wrap it several times around the bead, it'll make it strong. And if you feel that it's getting too thick, then you can just cut it and stop there. But remember that the more wrapping you add, the stronger your bead is going to be. Now let's make sure that the edges are really tight and pinching down those edges really well. And let's look for any air gaps. So you see we have a little air gap here, and that's from not pinching it down really well on the end of the bead, but that'll be okay. We can fill this with a little bit of glue and let that dry. And before we put our varnish or resin, we'll want that to dry completely. So now I'm going to fill a little glue in there, and the glue is going to dry clear so we won't see it, but it's just going to solidify the gaps. And if you put on too much glue, just wipe off the extra. So that is something that you can do if there are air gaps. All right, so let's let these dry completely for about an hour and then we can glaze them. We'll also want to wash our paintbrush with some soap and water before the glue dries completely onto the brush. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm going to show you one more variation. This is a trick I discovered. So when you use the tool to make the long box bead shape, the double sticks make the beads equal width on all sides. But we could use the same technique using only one stick to get something different. It'll make a long box bead that's really skinny on one side and wide on the other side, so you get something like this. I would call this a flat long box bead. Looks like a stick of gum. But it's just another style that you can get doing the same thing, just different measurements. So let me show you how to do these. So we're going to measure our wide piece of paper a little skinnier than the full size long box bead since the width of our bead will be thinner. And then for the length, you'll calculate the length of the bead that you want to make and multiply that times 3. And to measure the skinny strips, instead of 2 1/4 inch strips, we want one that's the width of our stick, which is 1/4 inch, and then the other one, the width of our skinny side of the stick, which is about an 1/8 inch wide. So I'm going to make this bead about 1.5 inch long again. And here is the wide piece for the outer layers. And I already cut them to length. And we need to make sure they go the right direction. Yeah, it goes like this. And I'm making a line so that we know which way it goes. And I did cut 3 strips, but I ended up only needing 2. Still learning as I go here. I made 2 other beads like this earlier, and they came out pretty nice. Okay, so we're going to get started. And this is going to be just a little more challenging because the pieces are very small. And we need to be a little more careful when we're getting those bends in there. So we always start with our wide piece and make sure that our lines go the same direction as the tool. And I'm using the top of my nail to really press the edges against my thumb. And when you get around to where you can glue it, just go ahead. I got some glue here. And go ahead and close it up. Make sure that you're getting those edges really, really good. And that's the start of our bead. Have to wait for this glue to set for a minute. While that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and pour a little more glue. I'm multitasking. All right, and this is ready. Now it's not going to be perfect most of the time because it's a very skinny bead. So just take your little fine scissors and you can trim off that little extra. And this one is ready to start. And it's just our base. So now we're going to add our skinny pieces. So I'm going to start with the wider one. And we glue it and line it up and bend it. Same as the other way, same technique. Make sure our edges are straight and try to get that bend in there on the end. Now see, I'm already getting a gap here. I don't like that, so I'm going to fix that. I'm going to pull this a little more tight. Now this is very delicate right now because it's very skinny and it's easy to squish it, which you can see I kind of squished it here. That's okay because when we add more paper strips, it'll thicken up and it'll be fine. Okay, now we have our two outer pieces and we'll always use two because we need that thickness to make the bead strong. So I'm going to start with this blue side because I want this inside. So make sure this is going longwise and line up the edges. Make sure it's centered and bend and pinch. Glue it up, bend and pinch, and again, and again. And then we have this little extra piece, so we can just cut that off with some little scissors. So I'm just kind of tightening up these edges, making them more sharp. All right. And we're going to do our last piece this direction. Line it up and centered and bend and pinch. Nice and sharp. And let's glue it so that we can finish attaching it. And I like to hold it so that it's pushing down on the table so that you have some resistance. And then I like to bend on the top so I can see what I'm doing. All right, so this one is done, but I'm going to trim off this little extra. This is where our fine scissors come in really handy. All right, so now you know how to make the flat long box beads just like these. So we're going to let these dry and then we can put our eyelets in afterwards. And that was just a way to show you a little variation. I hope you enjoyed it. So now we're going to talk about glazing. Now I have other tutorials on how to glaze beads with varnish and also with UV resin, which go much further into detail on these techniques. And if you'd like to watch them, they are listed below in the description. But today I'll be adding UV resin to our long box beads. And please always remember to wear gloves when you use UV resin. So I poured a little UV resin here onto some silicone mats. And I've got my scissor clamps to hold the beads so that my hands don't get in the way. We're going to paint with UV resin onto the bead with a paintbrush. And we'll be doing this in sections, so this will give a thin but strong layer of gloss to the bead while keeping its edges sharp. So we'll do this on two sides and one end first, and then when that's cured, we'll do the other two sides and end. Okay, now I'm also going to do one end, and I probably should have done the opposite end from where my scissor clamps are in the way. But the main thing is that you get the resin to go around the eyelet without going into the loop. And if by chance you get resin inside the loop, you can use a toothpick or a needle to clean it out, but make sure you clean it out before you cure the resin. Once it's cured in there, it's going to be really hard to remove. So I'm going to turn on my lamp, and you can use a portable lamp like this or a larger UV lamp. And I've got the two sides with the resin on them facing the light, so I don't need to rotate it like we would with a round bead. I plan to just cure each section for about 1 to 2 minutes, just enough to set the resin, and then put them both in the large UV lamp for about 15 minutes to cure completely. And now I'm going to do the other two sides. Now we want it to be thick enough to have a nice shine, but also thin enough that it doesn't run over. And just go easy on the edges, and then they should stay sharp. We don't want the edges to have so much resin that they round off and lose their sharp detail. So I'm adding a little more and a little more until I get a nice glossy shine. And I'm going really easy on the edges to keep that nice and sharp. And the UV resin is self-leveling, so if you see brush strokes when you first apply it, just wait a minute and it will smooth out. So I did get a little bit of resin in the loop, so I'm going to use a toothpick and clear the loop. Oh, we started curing, and again, it's just the two sides, so no need to rotate. So I'm just going to let it set and cure. And then these beads are pre-cured, so I'll set this one down, and now I'll do this one, and we'll do two sides. And if you make all the strokes go the same direction, it'll level out much quicker. And this time I'll do the opposite end of where my scissor clamps were. And let me speed this up a little. And now I'll put these into my large UV lamp for 15 minutes to cure completely. Now it's time to do some cleanup. Now the best way to clean your tools if you have any uncured resin on them is to use a little rubbing alcohol. And I like to use these little cotton pads and pour some rubbing alcohol on there. And then I just clean the tools and make sure there's nothing sticky on there. I like to keep my tools clean. Now for the paintbrush with the resin in it, first you'll want to use a napkin or a paper towel and just squish all that gooey stuff out as much as possible. Then hold your brush over your napkin and pour some more rubbing alcohol directly onto it and rub it on the napkin. And although it doesn't get all of it, it does get most of it. And after it's dry, it might be a little bit stiff, but most of the time you can just bend it back and forth and that'll soften it up. So that's what I do with my brush when I use UV resin. And then for the silicone mat, I just put that in the UV lamp for 5 minutes, and then all this stuff will peel off of here. And if there's any tiny bits that won't budge, you can lay a piece of box paper tape over it and just burnish it with a wooden stick or maybe your fingernails, and then just lift it up and all that tiny stuff will come up. So now you know how to make beautiful long box beads and flat long box beads, and you can use them however you want. You can use them for earrings, necklaces, key rings, whatever you dream up. Now I'm going to show you a few designs that I came up with. And for this one, I resined the two beads together, and I changed out the eyelets from silver to gold to go with the gold theme, warm colors. And I made a little emblem using some resin tape to hold my nail charms in place and some resin. Then I attached that charm on top here with resin. I put some resin on the bottom and laid the chain in place while it cured. Then I ran the chain through the loops, and I made sure that the chain lengths both come together in the center. I added some jump rings and a crystal that I had in my box, and of course you could use any charm with holes to attach here. And then of course I added the lobster claw clasp and some jump rings. Let me bring this a little closer so you can see. And now if you want more information on how to add jump rings, I cover that in my box bead tutorial as well. You can come up with whatever design you want for your own long box beads. And here are a few more ideas. You can double them up like I did, or have them hang in a horizontal tier. You can link them to other charms and make earrings or pendants, or link them together, link them to a chain to turn it into a necklace. You can make various lengths and colors. You can mix them with other shaped beads, such as the box beads, whatever you can dream up. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please give a thumbs up. And if you have any questions or video ideas, be sure to leave a comment below. And subscribe if you'd like to be notified when I release any new videos. If you'd like to support my channel, you can buy me a coffee below. And a big thank you to my subscribers. I appreciate you. Below are some links for some other related videos that you may be interested in. And there's also a link to all of my Juls Creation links that you can check out. Enjoy and never be bored.